My story begins in New York City. My mom and I had moved there when I was young, and one summer I wanted to go and visit my grandmother. My grandmother lived in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. My mother couldn't get off from work, so she took me downtown and see whether or not I could pass an aptitude test in order to travel by myself. And at 7 years old, she put me on a train, and I went to Mississippi. As time passed, I began to share with my grandmother some of the things that my stepfather had got me involved in. He had started giving me alcohol at a very young age. He and his brothers would take me to a store in New York. At that time, there was a store on every corner, and they would say, well, we're going to go in here and distract the owner, and we want you to get this, and that, and I would do that. My grandmother, upon hearing that, made a decision that I was not going to return to New York with my mom, and so she kept me there. Parenthetically, it was the same city that my biological father lived in. As a matter of fact, his mother lived a block away from my grandmother. So at 13 and watching my biological father go back and forth and never stop to say anything, and on one occasion him saying that he was going to stop and pick me up when we were going to do something. I'm waiting in the yard of my grandmother's, stuck between this white picket fence gate of hers, waiting for him to come and pick me up. And my grandmother says, no, Tony, you're going to have to come back in. He's not going to do that. And at that moment, I remember distinctly with tears in my eyes saying that I'm never going to cry over anybody or anything again. And that started for me a path of destruction, self-destruction, I may add. And so I came back from visiting my mother one summer from Miami, and I had already settled what I was going to do. I was going to be a drug dealer. I became more than a drug dealer. I became my best customer, and eventually ended up with a grand larceny case there in Mississippi, and was sentenced to 3 years. Decided that I really didn't like doing time. After about 30 days, found a way to escape, and I was an escape fugitive for 5 years. And I remember one day on Corrick Street in Fort Wayne, Indiana, my mom had moved to Fort Wayne, and I'm on Corrick Street, and there's a house across from her home, an abandoned house there, and I took a 3cc syringe full of synthetic heroin and cocaine. We called them T's and blues back then. And I shot it up, and I actually wanted to die, and realized after shooting up, I really did want to die. I went on my face before God in that abandoned house, and I said, if there's a God, if you take this habit away from me, I'll do anything that you want me to do. Walked across the street to my mom's. She took me to the Washington House, and I stayed there 7 days hugging a Bible. And 7 days later, my mom tells me that she's going to Mississippi to visit my grandmother. I felt like I needed to go back, and I just needed to tell her I was sorry for how my life turned out. Now, I knew that upon returning to Mississippi that I already had a case waiting me for escape. We went back to Mississippi. My grandmother was in the throes of Parkinson more than I ever imagined. And so I just stayed. On one evening, after about 3 weeks there, I'm downtown picking up a prescription of medication for her. Get stopped by the police who thought I was someone else, discovered who I actually was, and arrested me. I was sitting in a jail waiting to get the 3 years original charge and the 5 years for the escape charge, when a Gideon there in that jail by the name of Buck Man, he and his wife would come along with other Gideons, and Buck would come and he would have a Bible study with the guys. His wife would go upstairs along with some other ladies and have a Bible study with the ladies there. I did not want to initially embrace being seen talking to somebody that was talking about the Bible, but I felt compelled to do that. And I asked Buck, what do you mean about being born again? I heard you talk about this for several weeks. What does that mean? He took out a Bible and led me through the Romans road to salvation. In that jail cell, I accepted Christ as Lord and Savior of my life. And I began journaling in that jail cell, and I still have the journal where I wrote that this is the first time I felt free in years. Unknown to me, but I found out later that Buck had started mentoring a lawyer, discipling a lawyer that he had led to Christ. And he had that lawyer to come and see me and to share the story that how I ended up there. Buck got 21 of his peers, who were Gideons and their wives, to sign a petition to ask the judge to take me, to let me into their hands for discipleship. And for the next nearly 3 years, Buck crossed the tracks, discipled me, became the father I never had in any sense of the word. I tell people that I've had an incredible life. There are two things that I am thankful to God for. Number one, he's always given me someone who was older than me, who didn't need anything from me, that poured into me. Buck was the beginning of that. The second thing that I'm thankful to God for is that he put me in therapy. Because it wasn't just about me stopping the use of drugs. I had to go back and revisit the whole narrative of my life and how I ended up there, and unpack that laundry and clean some things up and deal with some things that I had with my father, etc. One of the true signs that I had came to a place of healing and peace with my dad is when he passed. We never had a relationship. I struggled with that. And my wife says, you need to go. This is the last leg of this journey for you concerning your dad. You need to go and do what you need to do. And so I drove to Mississippi by myself. I got there. There was no money to bury him. I had to help pay to bury him. He didn't have clothes to be buried in. I had to buy the clothes for him to be buried in. And there was nobody to preach the sermon for his burial service. I had to do that. I would have never been able to do any of that if I had not been in therapy, if I had not addressed the demons of the past. I believe that this is, as the old adage goes, this is the best of times and this is the worst of times. It's the worst of time because there is not one aspect, especially with African Americans, that you can look at where mental health issues isn't skyrocketing. In that case, it is the worst of time, but it's the best of time in this regard. More African American pastors and leaders are embracing therapy, embracing mental health, and seeing it not as a weakness that supersedes faith, but it is a companion of faith. And that if they are able to enter that space and help someone embrace those mental health issues that they may have, that they too will be better leaders and that our community as a whole would be better. So I'm Anthony Payton, and that's my story.